There is a silent yet ruthless paradox in the journey of an empath. They are naturally the ones who give love freely, yet they almost never know how to receive it. Not because they are weak, not because they lack trust, but because their heart has undergone an invisible reprogramming after loving a narcissist. For them, love once resembled a battlefield, where tenderness became a vulnerability to exploit, where kindness became a trap for others to cling to, where empathy wasn't a gift, but a burden that forced them to carry the other person's entire emotional world. And so unconsciously they formed an internal formula. To love is to lose, to open up is to hand over power, and to be loved is to prepare for something to be taken away. And as Sapwait and Sito says, to prepare for something to be taken away, Jung once said, what we avoid within ourselves will return to shape our destiny. For the empath, what they avoid is not the darkness of others, they are familiar with that, but the darkness within themselves, the fear that their needs will make them abandonable, the shame surrounding their own fragility, and the false belief that their worth lies in how much they can give to the world. From this they develop a persona, a radiant mask of kindness, understanding, and limitless patience to hide the truth that inside them is a child who has never been truly loved unconditionally. After leaving a narcissistic relationship, the empath doesn't simply walk away from pain. They enter unfamiliar territory where gentleness feels suspicious, care feels uncomfortable, and genuine love feels like standing before a cliff. They do not reject love. They simply do not know how to let it stay. Not because they are closed off, but because their inner system has been conditioned for too long to survive, not to receive. Being loved to them is not a sense of safety, but a loss of control. Having someone truly see them, understand them, support them, without asking for anything creates more unease than anything else. But this is also the moment when their journey begins to transform. Because sometimes, to step into real love, one does not need a brave heart. One needs a heart that has already been broken. The cracks, paradoxically, become the only doorway back to themselves. And once they understand that love is not an exchange, not a mission to heal someone, but a space where they can breathe, exist, and be needed without paying a price, that is when they begin learning the art they once believed they didn't deserve, the art of receiving real love without losing themselves. This is not impulsive vulnerability, but conscious opening, not the abandonment of boundaries, but the choosing of the right person, not melting into another, but the proud presence of a soul that knows, I am not here only to love, I am here to be loved too. Part 1. The infinite wounds after narcissistic damage. After leaving a narcissistic relationship, an empath doesn't only carry a fractured heart, they carry a nervous system that has been rewired, a soul that has grown suspicious even of things meant to be warm, and an ego conditioned to believe that any affection directed toward them must come with a cost. The scariest part is not that they stop trusting others, but that they stop trusting their own feelings. They can no longer distinguish real love from exploitation, pure kindness from the first step into manipulation. And this confusion makes receiving love nearly impossible, not because they reject it, but because they no longer have the internal mechanism to accept it. When someone enters their life with stability, steady presence, and sincerity without theatrics, the empath senses something is wrong, even if they cannot explain it. Because unconsciously they have equated love with an erratic rhythm, warmth mixed with cold, care mixed with control, connection mixed with humiliation, connection mixed with punishment. That pattern once produced dopamine, adrenaline, the familiar sense of being alive inside chaos. Healthy love does not produce that same high. It doesn't make their heart race. It doesn't demand they soothe someone. It doesn't require them to carry another person's emotional weight. Peace feels too unfamiliar, and that unfamiliarity feels empty. They mistake that emptiness for lack of connection, when in fact it is simply a nervous system detoxing from chaos. Through all the years with the narcissist, the empath learned a survival lesson. If they do not give, they will be abandoned. If they do not endure, they will be punished. If they are not strong, good, healing, they will be dismissed. From this formed an unconscious pattern. To love is to serve, to carry, to bear, to sacrifice silently until exhaustion becomes normal. Over time, they no longer believe they have the right to receive anything without giving back twice as much. They fear being cared for because it makes them feel indebted. They fear kindness because it triggers the worry that they won't be able to reciprocate properly. And their greatest fear is becoming a burden, something the narcissist once used to slice away their worth through every word, every look, every dismissive gesture. Jung said that people do not fear the world's darkness, they fear their own, the parts they had to hide to be accepted. For the empath, the darkness is the need to be loved, the need to lean on someone, the need to be vulnerable, the need to be cared for. They carry silent wounds, shame around having needs, fear of being looked down upon when showing tenderness, and the haunting belief that if someone sees their true self, they will leave. So when real love appears, a love that doesn't require them to be the healer, the stabilizer, the endlessly understanding one, a love that doesn't demand emotional labor or self-erasure, their heart doesn't open. It contracts. They do not say, "I don't want love." They simply don't believe that anyone could truly love them without requiring them to sacrifice themselves. Healthy love does not ask them to fix anyone, to shrink, to be perfect. It is simply an unconditional presence. And that is exactly what terrifies the empath. Because being loved means they must show up authentically, they must be honest, they must allow their awkwardness, they must acknowledge the fragile parts the narcissist mocked, they must accept that they too need someone, and that is something they have never dared to do. Because the truth is this, an empath has never truly experienced unconditional love in both directions. As a child, they were loved for being obedient, quiet, and non-disruptive. As an adult, they were loved for sacrificing, for understanding, for being strong, for always being there. And because they were only loved when they were useful, they never believed they deserved to be loved simply for being themselves. To them, unconditional love is a luxury, something meant for others, but never for them. And this is why, after escaping a narcissist, the empath lives in a painful paradox. They long for healthy love, yet unconsciously avoid it. They want to be seen, yet fear being seen. They want to be supported, yet reject every hand that reaches out. They want to be in a peaceful relationship, yet fail to recognize peace when it arrives. None of this is because they are weak, but because they remain loyal to the old pattern, the one that taught them that being loved is dangerous, and that loving someone to the point of self-exhaustion is the only safe way to exist. And this is the truth that opens the door to their entire next chapter. The empath does not need to learn how to love again. They need to learn how to receive. The problem was never their heart. The problem was their belief about what they deserve. Part 2. Nigredo. The moment darkness opens and the old pattern begins to collapse. There comes a moment in an empath's journey that no one can escape, a moment Jung called Nigredo, the stage of dissolution where the light goes out so that the truth can appear. People often think this moment is defined by the pain of loss, abandonment, or betrayal, but Nigredo is not an event, it is an awakening. It is the moment when every mask, every survival strategy, every role the empath has carried since childhood suddenly becomes too heavy, too tight, too painful to hold on to. It is not the collapse caused by someone else hurting them. It is the collapse that comes from no longer being able to live against their own nature. In that moment, the empath sees themselves for the first time, not through the eyes of others, but through the eyes of truth. The truth that for years they used compassion as a survival strategy, used giving to avoid facing their own needs, used strength to hide the fear of fragility, and used endurance to avoid saying, "I am not okay." This is the stage where every illusion they once depended on begins to melt. The illusion that they must always be kind to be loved, the illusion that they must always understand to be kept, the illusion that they must always keep the peace to avoid being punished. Nigredo exposes a truth that is difficult to face, that they, too, have been part of the toxic dynamic, not just as a victim, but as someone who maintained the cycle by agreeing to trade themselves away in exchange for something they mistook for love. And then comes a moment, quiet but devastating, when the empath realizes they have never truly existed in any relationship. They merely completed the other person's personality, filled their emotional gaps, became the mirror reflecting exactly what the other person wanted to see, not who they really were. This is the breaking point of the entire old pattern, because when they realize they have never been loved in truth, they also realize they have never allowed anyone the chance to love their truth. This realization sends them into Nigredo, as if stepping into a long night, a night of confusion, a night of raw exposure, a night of disorientation, where old beliefs dissolve but new ones have not yet been formed. In that darkness, the empath confronts their own shadow, the part they have always avoided, the fear of abandonment, the shame around having needs, the loneliness they suppressed, the anger they buried, and the desires they labeled selfish. All of it rises like forgotten figures, demanding to be seen and acknowledged. The empath realizes they are not always gentle, they have wounds. They are not always selfless, they have emptiness. They are not always strong, they are exhausted down to the bone. And instead of pushing these parts away as they always have, Nigredo demands that they look at them. No hiding, no rationalizing, no beautifying, just looking. This is where they ask, for the first time, why do I choose people who hurt me? Why do I believe love means accepting instability? Why do I reject the people who treat me well? Why do I carry the emotional burdens of those who never carry mine? Why do I feel I must be useful to deserve a place in someone's life? These questions are not comfortable, but they are the beginning of true awakening. They reveal that the pattern of loving, enduring, sacrificing is not the empath's DNA, but simply a survival reflex, formed in places where their heart was once dismissed. Nigredo teaches them the first lesson of healing. The structures that once saved them are the very structures that hurt them now, and only when they dare to release those old strategies, not by force, but by recognition, a new space appears. A space where they no longer need to be the healer, no longer need to endure to keep someone, no longer need to live through the reflexes of old wounds, and no longer need to hide behind the moral shell of endless kindness. The Nigredo is dark, but it is not the end. It is the breakdown before rebirth. In that darkness, the empath learns that they do not need to be worthy to be loved. As they learn that having needs is not weakness. They learn that vulnerability is not failure. They learn that love is not a battlefield, nor a reward. And most importantly, they learn that truth is the only foundation where love can exist without destroying them again. And the moment they admit this truth, even when their chest trembles from the pain, is the moment the old pattern falls away, like dead skin. A new chapter does not need to be written quickly, because the first step to a new chapter is not meeting the right person, it is meeting the right version of oneself. The version who no longer begs for love through self-sacrifice, but who can stand tall, open their heart, and say calmly, I deserve to be loved too. Part 3. The THAW. When the empath begins to receive love again, tentatively, slowly, but for the first time consciously. After Nigredo, after the old patterns have dissolved and the inner darkness has been faced, the empath steps into a very fragile, yet very beautiful phase, the thaw. This is not a sudden rebirth, not the moment they spring up and say, I'm ready to love again. No, the healing of an empath always arrives in silence, light as breath, like a thick layer of snow that has lain there for years and now begins to melt, drop by drop, not because the sun is blazing, but because their heart finally allows the light to touch it. This phase is not about action but awareness. They begin to notice small signals that they used to unconsciously push away. A compliment no longer makes them as defensive as before. They are still skeptical, but they no longer go straight into full protection mode. A kind gesture no longer triggers the reflex to give back twice as much. Instead, they pause for a moment to listen to how they feel. An outstretched arm no longer makes them as tense as if standing before a trap. They can sense the subtle difference between someone who wants to possess them and someone who is simply present. These changes are small, almost invisible, but they are the first steps by which their heart learns to receive without contracting. This is also when their brain and nervous system begin once more to distinguish between chaos and love. If in the past stability made them feel empty and bored, now they recognize that this emptiness is not a sign of a lack of emotion, but a peace they are not yet familiar with. They start to understand that love does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes like a quiet afternoon where nothing happens, yet they feel safe. And for the empath, for the first time, safety no longer equates to the feeling of, I'm going to be abandoned because I'm not doing anything to keep this person here. This is the most delicate yet pivotal moment. They realize that stability is not a sign of falseness. It is a sign of maturity. But the thaw does not only happen in their relationships with others, it happens within themselves. For the first time, the empath dares to say, I need to, without feeling ashamed. They dare to say, I'm tired today, without feeling like a failure. They dare to say no without feeling cruel. They dare to receive a gift without assuming they are now in debt. These things may seem small to others, but for the empath, they are milestones of rebirth, because what they are doing is not just receiving, they are breaking the unconscious curse that their needs are a burden. When an empath begins to accept these small things, they are relearning a language their heart once forgot, the language of unconditional existence. The thaw also brings a significant shift in how they see other people. If before they were always drawn to the wounded, to those who needed to be fixed, now they find themselves feeling a different kind of attraction toward those who are standing firmly on their own feet. At first this confuses them because they are used to feeling useful, used to feeling like the one who holds others up. But now they recognize something they never dared look at directly. They also need a shoulder strong enough to lean on, not to collapse into completely, but so they don't have to carry the whole world on their own anymore. At this point, the empath begins to feel the beauty of reciprocity. No one is saving anyone, but two people are lifting each other through the equality of two mature souls. They no longer choose love based on shared wounds, but begin to choose based on the level of peace the other person brings. In this phase, the empath learns an extraordinarily important lesson. True love does not make them shrink, it makes them expand. The narcissist made them contract, made them smaller, made them live in fear of losing connection. True love makes them open, open to new possibilities, to creativity, to the most mature version of themselves. For the first time, the empath feels they do not have to do something special to be loved. They just need to be present, authentic, not performing, not wearing a mask, not playing the perfect role they once tried so hard to embody. The most beautiful thing about the thaw is that it happens without noise. Slowly, the empath feels that their heart is no longer frozen in the face of kindness. Slowly, they see that not everyone who is kind has an agenda. Slowly, they understand that they are not in debt just because someone loves them. And slowly, they begin to feel something they thought they would never feel again after narcissistic damage: the ease of allowing someone to love them. The ease of allowing someone to love them. That ease is the sign of a new chapter, one in which they no longer love from their wounds, but from their maturity. No longer receive in a defensive stance, but in freedom. No longer choose by the reflexes of their scars, but by the awareness of a soul that has walked through the dark and knows its true worth. Part 4. The moment of re-establishing boundaries, when the empath learns to love without melting into another. Once the empath's heart begins to thaw and learns to accept even the smallest gestures of love without flinching, the next step is not to rush into someone's arms, but to re-establish something they have never truly possessed, their own boundaries. Not walls, not hyper-vigilant defense, not distance born from narcissistic fear to protect themselves, but mature boundaries, where love can exist without fusion, without sacrificing identity, without turning oneself into a container for someone else's emotions. This is the phase where the empath learns the deepest lesson of the entire healing process: loving without merging, connecting without losing oneself, giving without self-destruction, and receiving without fearing they will become a burden. This phase asks them to rethink their entire history of loving. The empath used to believe that love meant melting, becoming one, feeling everything the other felt, as if it were their own. What they didn't realize is that this model was born from a wound, not from love. They melted because they were afraid of being left behind. They merged because they were afraid of being different. They carried others' emotions because they believed that if they didn't, the connection would break. Jung once said, "To possess another is the illusion of an undeveloped ego." And the empath had lived inside that illusion in the opposite way. They believed that to be loved, they had to let others possess them. But when they step out of the narcissistic shadow, where they were drained by that very melting, they begin to understand that true love does not require fusion, but a subtle differentiation between me and you. In the past, even the smallest boundary made them feel guilty, as if they were rejecting someone, as if they were ruining the relationship. Now they start to see that boundaries are not rejection. Boundaries are the condition that allows love to exist without turning into dependency. And this is the stunning inner shift in the empath. They stop loving through fusion and begin to love through full presence. In the past, merging made them disappear in every relationship. Now they begin to stand upright in themselves. If before they gave out of fear, now they give from overflow. If before receiving made them feel indebted, now they receive as a natural exchange between two independent souls. The first time they set a clear boundary without shaking, that is the moment they feel themselves maturing in the deepest sense. Not maturing by enduring more, but maturing by knowing how to keep themselves intact. And in that moment, the empath understands something their heart had misunderstood for years. Love is not splitting yourself in half so someone else can feel whole. Love is two people standing firmly in their own being and then stepping toward each other. This is also the time they allow others to be responsible for their own emotions. If the other person is sad, the empath no longer panics and rushes in to rescue, because they now understand that this rescuing once led them to abandon themselves, to burn out, to become an endless source of supply for those who never take responsibility for their inner life. Now, the empath understands a crucial truth. Other people's emotions belong to them, and the empath has the right not to carry them. This is not coldness, this is health. As the empath's boundaries become clear, love for the first time becomes a sacred space. A space where two people coexist, not blend. The empath no longer feels reluctant to say no, no longer feels guilty for needing time alone, no longer fears that being honest about their limits will get them abandoned. They realize that those who leave because of their boundaries are never a loss, but a release, because the one who truly loves them does not want them to melt. Their person wants them to stand firm, bright, whole. And then something miraculous happens. Instead of becoming a container for other people's feelings, the empath becomes a companion, not a savior. They begin to say things they never thought they could say. You can tell me how you feel, but I can't carry it for you. I care about you, but this is something you have to take responsibility for. You're sad, and I'm here, but I won't dissolve into that sadness. These statements mark the moment the empath steps into albedo, the stage of separation, where they recognize that their essence does not need to dissolve in order to connect. But the most astonishing thing is this: when the empath holds their boundaries, love comes to them more fully, because they no longer choose those who want them to melt, but those who respect their space. They no longer drown in emotional storms, but are drawn to peace. They are no longer a saving light, but a parallel light. They begin to love without fearing they will lose themselves, because for the first time in their life, they have an ego strong enough to believe they deserve to be loved, without trading themselves away. And in that moment, the empath truly matures. They become someone who can love with a wide open heart, while standing firmly on the ground. Part 5. When the empath chooses love again with awakened eyes, signals they have truly healed after narcissistic damage. When an empath passes through the stage of re-establishing boundaries and stands in their own independent self, a profound shift begins to happen. They do not just heal, they change the way they see the world, the way they see others, and the way they see themselves in love. This is the point where their entire emotional system, nervous system, memory, and sense of identity begin to be restructured, and begin to be relived, and begin to be repaired. They no longer choose love by reflex, but by awakening. No longer choose what is familiar, but what is healthy. No longer feel pulled toward the narcissistic shadow, but drawn to peace, authenticity, and reciprocity. This is the hardest stage, but also the most beautiful, because it marks the moment the empath is no longer a victim of the old pattern, but becomes the architect of their own emotional life. The true recovery of an empath after narcissistic damage does not come from avoiding love. It comes from realizing that real love is not found in emotional extremes that create a high, in conflicts that make them guess, or in the hot-cold cycles that once felt so familiar. On the contrary, real love appears as a kind of stability that at first feels strange, a steady peace, a presence that is not noisy, a companionship that does not demand they prove anything. And at the very moment they no longer experience that peace as boring or lacking passion, the empath understands they have truly changed. They are no longer attracted to chaos, no longer unconsciously seeking drama, no longer confusing anxiety with love. They have stepped out of the emotional adrenaline addiction pattern that the narcissist once made them accustomed to. One of the greatest signs of recovery is that the empath begins to listen to the subtle sensations they used to ignore. The small voice inside that once whispered, "This is not safe," is now trusted, no longer silenced just to maintain a false peace. Their intuition, which used to be a tool to read others, to prevent storms, to understand and save, now becomes guidance they use to protect themselves. Instead of using their intuition to figure out what the other person needs, they use it to discern whether this person deserves to enter their life at all. This is a very subtle but radical transfer of power. The empath no longer uses their intuition to serve others, but to serve themselves, no longer uses their heart to rescue, but to discern, no longer listens just to understand the other, but to understand the truth. Gradually, the empath learns that real love is not a perfect person walking in, but a space where both people can breathe. And in order for space to exist, each person must have their own selfhood, something the empath had never truly allowed themselves before. But now they start to feel a sense of gratitude when they meet someone who does not want to control them, does not depend on them, does not demand to be healed or fixed. They begin to see the beauty of a person who stands before them as a whole soul, not as an emotional project they must carry on their shoulders. When the empath is no longer trying to save anyone, they can finally see the people who are actually capable of walking beside them, those who take responsibility for their own emotions, who are mature, who know how to love through actions rather than possession. And most importantly, for the first time in their life, the empath is no longer drawn to those who are deeply wounded, those who need to be pulled up, those who are chaotic. That unconscious pull, which once felt like a magnetic force, now disappears. Instead, they feel their heart move in the presence of health. A calm person makes them feel safe. A person with boundaries makes them feel respect. A straightforward person makes them feel trust. This is the clearest sign that they have changed at the root. Their nervous system no longer confuses insecurity with love. But what truly completes the empath's recovery is not that they choose the right person. It is that they choose themselves first, and the right person comes after. They no longer enter love to find their worth, to find a role, or to fill an inner void. They step into love as someone who is already full of awareness, full of self-respect, full of understanding, and because of that, their choices become clear and coherent. They can stop when something doesn't feel right. They can say no when someone is not a good fit. They can walk away without feeling like a part of their soul has been taken. The true recovery of an empath after narcissistic damage is also reflected in something subtle yet decisive. They stop blaming themselves when a relationship doesn't work out. In the past, the empath always thought they were not good enough, not patient enough, not healed enough. Now, they see clearly the difference between I am not enough and this person is not right for me. They no longer try to prove their value, no longer try to prolong what was never meant for them, and no longer apologize for loving themselves enough to leave. But perhaps the highest sign of recovery is when the empath begins to feel peace in being loved, instead of fear. No fear of becoming dependent, no fear of being swallowed whole, no fear of being abandoned, no fear of repeating the past. Because within them, a new belief has been formed. I deserve love without having to trade myself away. And this belief is not an affirmation they repeat to soothe themselves. It is a belief forged in darkness, in collapse, in recognizing their own mistakes, in facing the very shadow within that Jung called the rejected part. When that part is seen and integrated, the empath becomes whole. And that wholeness means they no longer need someone else to complete them. When the empath enters a new relationship with this level of maturity, love is no longer salvation. It is an encounter. No longer a test. It is a presence. No longer a performance. It is truth. And that is the final, most beautiful sign that they have healed. Love is no longer the place where they lose themselves, but the place where they become themselves, fuller, freer, and clearer. When an empath steps out of the darkness left behind by a narcissist, they often think their life ends there. But the truth is exactly the opposite. That is not a full stop. It is the threshold of a new way of being, where love is no longer an experiment, no longer a game of control, but a field where two free souls meet. Jung once wrote, "No one can truly love if they have not walked through their own darkness." And for that reason, the empath, the one who has traversed the deepest shadows of their own heart, is the one who is capable of loving the most deeply, the most enduringly, the most consciously. The love they receive after their healing journey is no longer about saving someone, no longer about trying to make themselves good enough, kind enough, gentle enough to be chosen. True love comes when they have realized that they do not need to be seen in order to exist, and do not need to sacrifice themselves in order to be loved. It comes when they understand that the peace within them is the most magnetic signal of all. A heart that has once shattered, yet still chooses to rise again, always emits a very different frequency. Not the frequency of need, but the frequency of freedom. And when new love enters their life, it looks like nothing they have ever known. No more silent treatments followed by explosions, no more role reversals, no more feeling like they must shrink themselves to keep the peace. The one who comes after does not enter their life to possess, but to walk alongside. No demands, no pulling, no forcing, no control. They see the empath as a whole human being, not as a mirror, not as an emotional regulator, not as a default healer. They love what is real, what is vulnerable, what was once labeled too much by a narcissist. And that becomes the miracle. The empath is finally loved in the way they once loved others. Healing is not about becoming perfect. Healing is when you no longer allow others to decide the value of your heart, when you no longer use your light to illuminate dark places that refuse to change, when you understand that kindness is only truly beautiful when no one is exploiting it. And at that very moment, love, the very love you thought you had lost faith in, will find its way to you, not loudly, not dramatically. It arrives like a peaceful morning, like the awakening of intuition, like a gentle reminder that, at last, you have come home to yourself. The love an empath receives after walking through a narcissist is not a reward for their pain. It is the result of their growth. It is the sign that your soul has become strong enough to tell who has come to use you and who has come to lift you up. It is the moment you see yourself so clearly that no one can ever make you doubt yourself again. And perhaps this is the truest form of justice life offers. The narcissist loses you forever while you find yourself. And from there, you find the kind of love your heart truly deserves. A love that does not devour you, does not drain you, does not make you question your worth, but a love that lets you blossom, lets you grow, lets you be free. The love of two souls who have walked through enough darkness to cherish each other's light. Your journey began with pain, but it never ends there. It ends in freedom. And from that freedom, real love finally finds its way back to you.